Welcome to the Shaltazar Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Eisen. I am a spiritual life coach, channeler of Shaltazar, and an energy intuitive. This podcast is about using spiritual wisdom, insights, principles, and practices to integrate and embody into your life in a practical way. My guests share their story of their spiritual journey, as well as how their spiritual beliefs, insights, and practices have helped them live a better life. Their life stories help others understand and accept life's challenging opportunities for learning, expansion, and growth. The Shaltazar Podcast is all about integrating spiritual wisdom into your life in a practical way. My guest today is Stanley Tsiamoulis from Sydney, Australia. I connected with Stanley on LinkedIn. I took advantage of a free offering he has to get a numerology reading and loved it and loved what he said and loved him. And I am a big fan of numerology and really excited to have Stanley as my guest today. Welcome, Stanley.
Welcome, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me on your show. Much appreciated.
Right. Stanley, why don't you start off by just telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got into numerology, astrology, and you're a multi-talented healer. And why don't you share a little bit about how you got into it in your life story?
Yes, thank you. Basically, I guess I've been always a seeker. I have an old soul. My mum said when I was born, I had 3 white hairs on my head, and I've always just been wanting to learn like a child. I never stopped learning. And in the year 2000, I began to seek and go to seminars and events at that time on property, and then at that specific event, they were breaking arrows and steel rods with the throat. And I thought, wow, what's the mind capable of? And then I began to learn about marketing and self-development and personal development. And then along those lines of seeking deeper, a true passion came forth with numerology and astrology. And I had my own mentor, a Swami. I began to really study the ancient, beautiful science of the Vedas. And with my Swami, I began to then take it to another level. And I created my own modality called the ESP code numerology, ESP standing for Essence, Soul, and Purpose, which shows people a 4-numbered sequence just merely by knowing their date of birth. And it shows people how cycles and biorhythms work through numbers, and it's all a derivative of the beautiful science of astrology. I love using acronyms and phrases, and I say that astrology is the science of God, mathematics is the language of God, and numerology is the code of God. And I'm always channeling all the time that code with the ESP code numerology. So what I do now is I guide people and solve problems alongside them by mathematically realigning them according to their 4-numbered sequence with the ESP code. And that forms part of my seeking of Zenith culture. So the word Zenith is like pointing to the stars. So I'm creating a culture or community, if you will, with Zenith culture that people can understand themselves much deeper, leading with the ESP code numerology.
Fascinating. Tell me a bit more about how that passion of numerology and astrology got ignited in you. I mean, we all have to take mathematics in school, but obviously yours was a deeper passion. Tell the listeners a bit about how you knew that you were here to work with numerology.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Jeffrey. I guess I always love speed. I have a very fast mind. And in the 5th grade, when I was 10 years old, the teacher had these quizzes with the mathematical times tables from 1 to 12. And we would have competitions, and I kept beating the class in terms of both accuracy in 100 questions and getting 100 out of 100, but answering those extremely fast within minutes. And at that time, because I kept beating the students, I went against the teacher, then I beat the teacher. And then fast forward, when I was in my early 30s, I began to really seek in wisdom, and I started coming across different numerology books and just seeing spiritual people that both psychics and also into numerology. And I found it fascinating how they knew myself just through numbers. So I began to really deeper into it. And then I began studying, because I had led a team in currencies, in foreign exchange. I had a team here in Sydney, in Nigeria, in Africa, and a couple of other African countries. And I taught 2,500 people. And how the synergy works or the synchronicity works, I came across the Swami, and he was using astrology in how to trade commodities. and he was showing how this works with cycles. And I thought that was fascinating because I'd come across W.D. Gann, who's very famous in the early 20th century in forecasting the stock market and using cycles, using astrology. So then, we began to go deeper into how everything happens with cycles and breaks down this human psychology of fear, greed, and indecisions when they're trying to make money, whether it be in the stock market, commodities, or the forex. It's the same principle of fear, greed, and indecision. So by learning that and talking with my Swami, we began to go even deeper just from commodities in terms of spirituality and the beautiful science of how the Vedas work. And it is just science and it's mathematics. And I thought, wow, this was profound wisdom. And from looking into this, and I began to I was one of his best students. And then I met some other people that had really studied the Kabbalah, and there's beautiful wisdom there. And they thought this was just at another level. And because I go into things that I love so passionately, I began to formulate my own modality by cross-referencing and merging both Vedic, Indian, Greek, Chinese, and Western modalities to create my own system. And because numerology is a little bit simpler for me to help and guide people, I love astrology and I use different modalities and help people with astrology, but the numerology allows me to help and guide people extremely fast because I love speed. And that goes back to my 5th grade when I was 10 years old. So lo and behold, who would know, say about 26 years later, I'll be fine-tuning my craft. And in December 2011, I created the ESP Code Numerology. In September 2012, I founded Zenith Culture. And since then, I've been guiding people predominantly with what I call the science of light, being numerology and astrology.
Let me ask you a question. I love numerology. I've never been really attracted that much to astrology, but I know a lot of people are into astrology. Help the listeners understand the connection between astrology and numerology, what the similarities and what the differences are.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question as well. I call astrology being the umbrella of all the modalities, and numerology is like a pillar of that. The same thing with face reading and palmistry and other modalities. They're all derived from astrology because the celestial planets emit a frequency, an energy, if you will, and they bring forth the mathematics. This is why I say astrology is the science of God and mathematics is the language of God. Numerology happens to be that pillar where it's the code of God, and it allows people to understand it at a simplified level, because astrology is extremely beautiful, complex science with so many different modalities according to the movement of the planets. And I've synergized that into a 4-numbered sequence. So think of numerology as the child of astrology, so to speak, a simplified version.
So in other words, what I hear you saying is that the source, God, whatever we wish to call that higher power, is really doing things that we may not totally understand, but the clues to what is happening is in astrology and numerology and all of those things, so that when people are looking at an astrology reading, they're really looking at a deeper way of what the source is doing or the energy that is coming forth. Have I got that right?
Yes, because if you think of ourselves, we are fixed and the celestial planets are moving. And because they're moving, and in astrology, they're known as transit, they emitting certain frequencies and energies according to how those transits are affecting people with both their date of birth and time of birth and their location. The beautiful thing with numerology is we need less data and just purely the date of birth to depict what the general people that have seeked in numerology being, say, what they call the life path number. That is one number that I use in my 4-numbered sequence. However, we have 4 numbers and they all play a role along our journey, which is hence the reason why I mathematically realign people. Just like a chiropractor or an osteopath can realign a person's physical body, I realign people at the subconscious level because the numbers speak to us at a much deeper level.
Explain to me how you do that. So if I've got, a lot of these numbers come from your birth number, I would assume, from your date of birth, and there are different ways of looking at that date of birth. So I've got this number code based on when I showed up in the planet. How can you change me by simply looking looking at those numbers.
It's not in the facts that I change. I merely bring forth some wisdom that yourself or other people may have not realized prior. So I bring the subconscious to the conscious level. So then you begin, or the other people begin to say, okay, I sort of see that. And then they begin to see synchronicity and, deja vu or coincidence. And then they begin to see, say, numbers or days and months, or street sign or a shirt on a person or a car plate. They begin to see how the guardians, guides, and angels talk to us through numbers.
Yeah, fabulous. I love that. I love that part. I'm a big fan of 1111 and 111 and watching those numbers. So what I hear you say is you bring people's attention to their hidden number code, their numerology code, and by doing so, they get to become aware of things that were hidden to them before. I got that right?
Correct. Yes. Very well said. Perfect.
Okay, good. Because I want to make it for our listeners, some people sort of think that astrology, numerology, it's sort of all way out there. Part of the purpose of this podcast is to be able to apply it in a more practical way. So, and I've had a reading from you. When someone gets a reading and they understand their numbers and you've put it together in the ESP model, how is that additional information going to help them in their life?
So when people become clients of mine, I predominantly have like a 3-month and 12-month sort of program. Like they have a 90-minute session with me. We mind map notes because I mind map and I landscape instead of A4 and I use color and I begin to channel. And we go through specifically 3 desired outcomes that they're looking to achieve, whether it be in business or personal life. We show how their own biorhythms, their cycles are all driven around their 4-numbered sequence. So then we begin to formulate a plan in terms of not so much forecasting, just understanding how the energies ahead of time are looking to unfold. So then say, for example, if someone is looking into the business side, how to strategically align with someone, which resonancy or frequency is good with someone, or how to avoid a certain combination with someone. So, and then the same principles can be applied, say, for someone in their personal life, if they're looking for a loved one or they're having problems with their current people. So the code can be applied practically and its application is limitless, whether it be for business and or personal life. So what I do is and the reason why people are connecting me for 3 months is they begin to ask questions I love to answer on the fly very fast. And I say, great. And then let's test that one with that, or see what your child's code is and see how you resonate maybe with your one child as opposed to the other and why things are happening. So what happens is when, say, for example, a parent begins to understand who they are and then they begin to understand the essence, soul, purpose of the child, the beautiful thing is you want to maximize the productivity and you want to complement weaknesses. So when people are in line or in sync with what they're doing, they're more happier, they create, they add more value. So the synergy, whether it be in the business environment, say in the office or in the household, uplifts because the energies of each individual are happier because they're doing what their soul wants them to do. Right. So I merely bring forth the soul to the physical realm, hence the subconscious to the conscious.
Right. I mean, Shaltazar leads me to believe that implanted in our DNA are propensities. And what I hear you saying, how that reconciles with my beliefs, is those propensities, the key to those propensities or the hints towards those propensities appear in our numbers, in our numerology. And so we have a coding that is more than just our name. It is a coding of possibly what the soul has come forth to experience in this lifetime. And you're saying that numerology helps us understand that. Fabulous. Yeah. There's a couple things that you mentioned. You talked about mind mapping and you talked about understanding your cycles. Tell me more about what that means.
Yeah. In 2011, April 2011, leading up to it, I began to look into speed reading because, again, going back to my 5th grade when I was 10 years old in 1985, when I was very fast in my mathematics. In my 30s, I began to want to, because I love absorbing information, I thought I wanted to learn about speed reading. And I ended up coming across a person who was semi-retired and had the second highest IQ in human history behind Galileo. He used to teach the elites in Los Angeles in the 80s and the sheiks and their children how to master books and reading fast, to learn fast. And we had a Skype call together. And at the time, he was just talking and I was profoundly writing. And at the time, I was writing A4 with a margin down the middle. So I was writing down the left-hand column and down the right-hand column. And I didn't know, but he was interviewing me without realizing it because he was reading my face profile. He was watching how I was just profoundly writing. And he goes to me, "You are a learning machine. And normally I don't take on wild cards, but I'll take one." And I thought, okay, I didn't know quite what he meant. But basically, basically, I ended up flying to Scotland and I learned with him one-on-one for 5 days. I had to wear a suit and tie because he was teaching me the professionalism of how to learn with speed reading. And he also had an upbringing from knowing some Indian people. He actually knew Osho personally and Maharishi, and he taught me how to speed read, how to posture, and then he actually calibrated my left and right hemispheres of the brain using a technology that he has with flickering of wavelengths on the eyes. And then we tested that with printing, and we showed on the graph how he calibrated my left and right hemisphere of the brain. And part of that lesson was beginning to learn to mind map. So I've now been writing my notes for 9 years. I've recolored my brain. I landscape. So I flip the paper to landscape mode and I use color. I just don't use black pen because black, he says, suppresses the right hemisphere of the brain. And then he also mentioned blue is just the new black. So basically I use different colors and highlighters when I'm doing my note taking. And the reason by using mind mapping, you think of it as your brain with ventricles. I start with a circle in the middle of the page and I have quadrants and I begin to mind map certain parts. So then I'll have like a bigger circle, a smaller rectangle, and then some folders on the paper. And that's the reason why I'm doing that is I absorb information so fast, I want to retain it as well. And by writing in mind mapping, I found that I retain the information far, far greater. Say 5 years later, I can go back to what a certain topic was. I had that ability prior, hence when I was talking to him, I was writing vertically down the page, left to the right as A4. But now by mind mapping, I flipped it on landscape using color. And basically the fundamental principle of that is to use both my left and right hemisphere of the brain, meaning the left is the logical lateral thinking, whilst the right is the artistic and emotional.
It's kind of fascinating, that as you're talking, so many people just think we're simple human beings, and there is so much below the surface. There is so much that we are unaware of, and congratulations to you for delving deeper into this deeper understanding of our brain waves and our cycles and how we read and how we write and colors and numbers. And so, to put it in a practical sense, I really encourage listeners to look into the deeper sense of who you are as a human being. There's a greater understanding. I know through my channeling of Shaltazar from a spiritual perspective, it has given me greater insights. And Stanley, through the work you've done, you've got greater insights on not only yourself, but other people. And so certainly, during this period that we're starting to come out of self-isolation, use some time to go within and try to get a better understanding of the complexity of who you are, because it certainly can help you in your life.
Definitely. I believe we all have gifts. And you also mentioned about brainwaves. One of the takeaways I learned back 9 years ago, and it's funny how we go 9 because we do things in 9-year cycles. So this was in 2011, we're now in 2020. So I'm now running that same sort of cycle. The whole idea is every 9 years, though, we want to ascend higher. Us as humans, the biggest, what I call genocide, if you will, or the biggest disadvantage that people have is not to want to seek. And every 9 years, we go through completion of cycles and we always want to keep ascending and go higher. But you mentioned brainwaves, and brainwaves can be tested. And brainwaves, just like, say, the COVID-19 and coughing can be contagious, brainwaves are contagious. So what I mean by that is, if you say your brain is attached to nodes and it's testing on the EEG, and you're just sitting there quiet, peacefully, and say someone's walking behind you, 5 meters behind you, total stranger you don't even know, and they may be angry. They may not even be speaking out loud, but their thoughts may be angry. Those thoughts can then go to your thoughts and it can show on the EEG. So just as coughing is contagious, so are brainwaves. So we as humans, when we go in our work environment or our household or from the upbringings from parents or from seminars when we learn a certain topic and we're sitting, if people don't know how to protect their auras, their energies, and sometimes the people around them, those brainwaves may be inflicted into theirs and may lead them to do a decision or make a decision that's not really for their higher self. So the beautiful thing in self-reflection from COVID or the corona is for people to look within, like you said. When people look deeper and look within and see from how I channel the ESP code or how you channel your guide, people, when they seek people like ourselves, can get further, deeper information about themselves so they're not led astray in what they're meant to be doing along their journey.
I love the way you explained how, in a more scientific approach. I do it in a more spiritual, energetic approach, but we are in total agreement that person putting out angry thoughts is definitely affecting us. And that's why this is an important time in world history. Because of the pandemic, we are being susceptible to an inundation of fear, energy, fear waves. There's the conspiracy stuff. There's a whole turmoil of energy being bombarded at us. And I'm a big fan of going within and not becoming as susceptible. If you could get to that point where you could protect yourself against those brain waves or those energy droplets coming at you. And the way to do that is to become more anchored, more centered, and realize that you can control your energy level so that you can become more positive when there's so much negativity around you. Stanley, let me ask you about 2020 and this world event called COVID-19 and the number 19 in COVID, and help us understand the current situation from a numerology perspective.
That's a phenomenal question as well. I actually broke down the COVID-19 in a PowerPoint presentation for my clients last month. And in a simplistic term, 2020, the year 2020, when you add it, 2 + 0, 2 + 0 = 4. And 4's got to do with structuring, or as you just mentioned now, grounding. So Earth, or us humans in Earth, and it's crossed all religions. If you see it, we're all locked in or in our structure and being forced to ground. And that began on the 15th of September last year, because the year, the way I calculate it, begins on the 15th of September. And coincidentally, the virus, from the conspiracy angle side of things, for those that looked into it, sort of may or may not have began from the World Military Games that happened in around October last year in Wuhan, China. And as we know from the news, this virus broke out predominantly from Wuhan. So as we go into 2021, which begins in September 15, so we're only 3 months away, we're going to see Earth go into 5 years. So it's going to shift from 4, which is structured grounding systems, into 5, which is more got to do with the ether and the internet, and then travel. And travel can be whether it be physical, so whether the restrictions get less and people can begin to travel more, but it can also relate to the ether or the internet, which relates to 5G. So we know there's a lot of 5G towers going around. There have been, but a lot more have been implemented during the lockdown. So a lot of the technologies of the Internet of Things and so forth will begin to manifest and roll out a lot more faster come about 3 months' time when the Earth is in the 5 year. So we have those elements. And then even in the breakdown of the COVID and then the 19, when I break that down, it came down to 26, which is 2 + 6 is 8, which can mean possibly a financial reset, which is for those that are into the conspiracy side of things. There's looking possible that this may happen, and there's different elements, whether this comes through a controlled cryptocurrency or whether it comes from a gradual process that may unfold over 3 years, leading to complete financial reset. So it won't just be a sudden. This could be the initial planting of the seed that unfolds over a 3-year period. Because if it were to be full sudden, I think it would be too chaotic for everyone around the planet. So it's very interesting times, but I do know that 2020, as we know, we hear the term 2020 vision. We're going to see a lot of things unfold throughout this year, whether they're very hidden and suppressed technologies that have been there for many, many years. These will begin to release and help humanity, and some other things where people have 2020 where they need to wake up. And wake up means, like what you said before, look within. And by looking within and waking up, they then can be in control of their own environment and not so much affected from the outside environment, which is not easy to do because we're all affected from what's currently going on, but there's always ways to maneuver.
Mm-hmm. So for the listeners that are interested in dabbling a little bit in numerology, I know a lot of people say, just be aware of the numbers, be aware of the patterns. How would you recommend people that, besides calling you to get their ESP number, how would you help people on a more elementary, basic level to be able to tap into the coding of numerology that happens all around us every day?
It's really got to do with seeking. So there's a lot of things online about numerology, and it gets them into a simplistic level. On my site, I have somewhere where they can get the calculation of their third number, which is part of the 4-numbered sequence. But the key really is to understand how their biorhythms and their cycles work. And that happens from curiosity. and then a further wanting to know how to solve their problems. And that's where I can mathematically realign them. When clients are connected to me for 3 months or 12 months, whether it be the reading or the workshop that I offer, it's more got to do with they have some problems that need solving, and I show it in a way that is quite unique as opposed to other realms in the spiritual realm or in the personal development or the life coaching realm. I actually have a lot of people who are very, very spiritual healers, and some are in life coaches, hypnotherapists, some are financial planners as my clients. So a lot of people don't know that some of the most famous people on the planet, the most powerful people on the planet, if they go to my website and click the Astrology for Billionaires tab, you would see the most influential, powerful, most political, military people now and for thousands of years have astrologers and numerologists as their guides. And they don't make a tactical move without confiding in their guides. It's the same thing as the Magi or the three Magi. They were from the East. They were astrologers that followed the celestial planets. So it's a fine science. It's a beautiful science that people seek. And a lot of influential people that are extremely successful have accredited their success from their spiritual guides, spiritual advisors. And a lot of these people like accuracy, and they like to know exactly how things are unfolding. And that's where numerology and astrology can come to fruition for people to see how these events unfold. And this curiosity or this blowing of their mind once they know their 4-number sequence allows them to go, wow, there's more to life here. This is deep here. This is spiritual. And the beautiful thing with people like yourself and myself we all have gifts. There are so many people, humans walking around, and the sad thing is they don't realize that they've got a gift that they haven't expressed or shunned through in their life before they leave this planet and reincarnate in the next life. So that's
an excellent point. It's like tap into your gifts, people, because we all have them. It's really quite fascinating. We are running out of time, but one last question I'd love you to comment on, and that is science and spirituality, numerology, mathematics, sometimes astrology there. They tend to be more in the sciences. I tend to be more in the deeper esoteric, mystical spirituality. How do they fit together? Do they fit together? So comment please on science versus spirituality.
Yeah, that's another beautiful question. A couple of years ago, I wrote a blog post about that. I say science and spirituality, religion and philosophy, mysticism and esoteric wisdom all go hand in hand. It's actually part of the same. You can't have one without the other. So when you look at, say, the mystics, and I have Greek background, like say from Pythagoras, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, Aristotle, who then went on to teach Alexander the Great, and you look a lot of the movies in the American culture that have taken a lot from the Greek history and like the Delphi and the Oracle. This is mysticism, but mysticism forms part of science, because that's why I say astrology is the science of God. And a lot of mystics are getting their channeling or their claircognizance or their clairsentience or their clairvoyance, if you will, from the energies from these celestial planets, because they're emitting frequencies. And there are other life beings that are terrestrial, which I'll go deeper in another conversation of how the planets really are. But that's where people are getting their gift from, because think of the planets in its simplistic form, just the sun and moon. Think of it as a transmitter and the moon as a receiver. So think of it as a radio. Radio, when you're fine-tuning the dial to tap into a certain channel, it's the same thing. That's what the sun and moon is. It's a God's radio tapping in. So that's got to do with spirituality and science. It goes hand in hand. You can't segregate. It's the same thing with astrology and astronomy. People say, oh, no, astronomy is scientific because it's this, and astrology is pseudoscience. But you have to go back into history. It was one and the same. It's been segregated just in the last 300 years, and that's a mistake, because you can't have one without the other. It's holistic to have both.
Love that answer, because I'm a big fan of that holistic. And in a recent message I channeled from Shaltazar, they talked about science and spirituality, and they said, who do you think invented the science? And it was the source, God. They say it was your scientist that maybe discovered it, but the energy behind it was very divine. And so I think it's important for people to realize a lot of debate and a lot of infighting between science and spirituality, just like humanity. I think science and spirituality, I agree with you, are the same, just as all humanity is the same, even though we have different opinions. And I want to sort of end on that note, putting in a plug for unity and getting together and uniting humanity, just as science and spirituality. And I really enjoyed this conversation, because although my tendency is more spiritual, I'm fascinated to hear the numerology and the astrology and the science. And you've been a great guest. Thank you so much for for being on. At my time, I am recording this at 11:11, so there's certainly some numbers in that. I know you're in Australia and you're the next day.
It's 1:11 right here, right now, and that's synchronicity.
Isn't that interesting? That's fascinating. So here you are in Sydney, Australia on Saturday. I am in Toronto, Ontario on Friday, and we've got those ones together. So
that synchronicity happens all the time. Like, because I'm an 11, 22, 33. I'm in a 33 master number. But if you remember when I read for you, you also have a 33 from your sun and moon, which is your day and month, and that's a submaster. So synchronicities happen everywhere. And I find when I calculate the probabilities, I've had sometimes 1 in 43 million happen within a 3 to 5 minute period when some certain astrologer walks into the same room that I'm in that happen to be the same date of birth, and the time of it happens to be the date of birth, say, of another family member. This happens all the time because we are getting signs and these messages from our higher guides and guardians and angels, if you will, and we just see it through the numbers.
So there's a challenge to people. Look for the synchronicities. There is more to life than meets the eye. Thank you so much, Stanley, for being such an amazing guest. Why don't you just take a couple minutes to tell people how they can get in touch with you? All of that information will be in the description of the podcast. I encourage you to get in touch with Stanley. I had a complimentary reading from him, and it certainly was very powerful. Stanley, why don't you tell people how they can get in touch with you?
Thank you, Jeffrey. My website is Zenith Culture, so that's Zeneth. It's with an E, not an I, culture.com. And you will see on there I have the readings, the workshops, and I do astrology at the moment for some high net worth people. And on the footer, there are all my social media links are on there, so they can see predominantly there. I'm very active on LinkedIn, but people can get a hold of me through the contact page. My phone number's there. Again, they can send me messages on the social media. But currently right now, I'm offering a special with 90-minute sessions with people, one-on-ones, and we can record it through Zoom or Skype video and audio, and I mind map and channel desired outcomes, 3 problems that they need solutions to, and then they're connected to me for 3 months. And that's pretty much unlimited access where I answer things on the fly for them, and we have question and answers at the end of each month. So that's the reading 90-minute session. And then, of course, I've got my 2-day virtual workshop, which includes the 90-minute session, but they're connected for 12 months. So they're going deeper. The reason why I've got these 3 months, 12 months is as I'm mathematically realigning them, they're going to have synchronicities ramp up in their life because they're connected energetically to me. And I'm going to show them how to interpret the synchronicity. This is the key. So they know how to filter, evaluate, discern, and discard. And the pearls of wisdom that remain, they master. And that's the beautiful thing of what numerology and astrology can offer. So
excellent. Thank you, Stanley. I highly encourage the listeners get in touch with Stanley. You've been a great guest, and I'd love to have you on again sometime in the future. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. This is the Jeffrey Eisen podcast. I'm Jeffrey Eisen, a spiritual life coach, channeler of Shaltazar, and an energy intuitive. And until next time, love and light to you all.